For the next hour, we'll get into it. We'll talk a little bit about the history of the Scrum Guide and how it's changed. But the vast majority will be, let's talk about the 7 main changes of the new Scrum Guide there. So we start in the top left-hand corner, a little bit, some links that could be interesting. I'll talk about those in a sec. We'll talk about the different versions of the Scrum Guide over the years. Oh, what I've also done is I've created a questions area in the top. This worked out well in one of the user groups I did, where if you're in here, you can just double click and start adding questions up here. But if you feel comfortable, just ask a question. I'll pause along the way for that. Usually I'll take a drink. That's a good time to jump in, or you can raise your hand. I like looking at faces. So for those of you who have the video on, it helps me out a lot while I'm going through this. And raise your hand, ask questions in the chat, however you want to do it. I want to keep this interactive. I don't want it to just be me talking the whole time. I also see, yeah, Michael joined there. Michael, you and I have met before.
We have,
yeah.
I've seen, but we don't have to discuss that in public.
Yeah. Good. And then Russell is a friend and colleague, fellow professional Scrum trainer as well. So there's a lot of experienced people here. And I heard a little bit from Diane. Seems to have a lot of good practice. So jump in with your impressions and questions along the way, or answer questions as well. Okay. So here we go. On the top left-hand side, a little bit about improving. You can check us out at improving.com. My LinkedIn is here as well. You can double click this to get to it, or if you're not on my mural, you can just Google or LinkedIn my name. It's unique enough that you'll find me. I linked to my book on Amazon as well. And a little bit about why that book was written. I had the opportunity to teach a lot of product owner courses. And when I started doing the certified product owner courses at scrum.org 10 years ago now, I noticed that in a lot of the product owner courses I took were very much, about how to write a user story, how to write acceptance criteria, that kind of stuff, like very tactical things. And I realized, having been a business analyst and moved into the product owner role, I realized that was like the part that was not the main part of what I did as a product owner, right? I was much more successful when I cared more about the vision and could communicate that and work closely with customers and looked at how I can create more value more often, rather than just getting a project done on time and answering questions for the development team. So the more strategic I became and the less tactical, the more effective I thought I was. So what we did is, when we redesigned this course for scrum.org, I got to work with Ken Schreiber on this and propose a course. Ralph and I, a fellow trainer out of Switzerland, we actually went to the Agile 2013 conference, and we basically skipped the whole thing and rewrote the course. We got so energized by this, and then we presented it to Ken Schreiber, and he liked it. And that's now the current PSPO course for scrum.org. And what it does is it front loads everything about strategy. Like the first third of the course is strategy, like product management, agile product management, how to make a business model for your product, how to create a vision, how do you measure value, how do you validate? These are called the 3 V's, vision, value, validation. And then we introduce Scrum only after that. And that's kind of the subtitle of the book, which is, leveraging Scrum as a competitive advantage, because it's not about Scrum. But I realized that Scrum, a good Scrum team that's developing a potentially shippable increment every sprint, gave me an advantage as a product owner or product manager. Like, I had something I could test against the market now. I could validate my ideas more often. So I looked at Scrum through a new lens. Once as a product manager, I'll use that term. So if I, as a product manager, played the product owner role in Scrum, I could get a good advantage for my organization. So, and then only after that, the last third of the course is about tactical stuff, like building a product backlog. Talking about user stories is one aspect of that, and release plans, putting release plans together. So that's the core thing. And then Ralph and I ended up writing a book about it, and that's what this book is that will be given away afterwards. So let's talk about the Scrum Guide. So we made some changes to the Scrum Guide. If you haven't read it, there's a link here for it. It's scrumguides.org. You can, if you just Google Scrum Guide, you'll probably find it. It's a good read. It's a much easier read now. It's down to 13 pages without having to reduce font or anything. Now, it might seem strange that it's changed, but it's changed quite a bit over the years. This is an image actually that one of my friends at scrum.org, Patricia, took when she was there. This was the original write-up around Scrum, which was 23 pages. And this is from 1996, it looks like, February 1996, or it's a version of the original one. By 2003, Ken Schwaber had put together this thing called Scrum Methodology that was 163 pages. He told me he had lawyers looking at this thing. He was considering, like, if you were to use Scrum, you might have to pay some sort of fee or something, right, around it. They're still working through that. And then he realized that was totally the wrong direction. Scrum works when you're able to make adjustments and make changes and not have it so prescriptive. So he said, I've heard him say these words. He said he spent the next 10 years removing things from that document. And that's what the Scrum Guide is. And the more he removed, the more valuable it was for more people. And he said, I've heard him say things like, everybody wants me to change something or add something to Scrum, but every time I add something, I make it just a little less valuable to somebody else. And so certainly in today's day and age where Scrum is being used well beyond software and IT, it's a little bit more applicable. So the first official Scrum Guide, when it was skinnied down in 2011, was 16 pages. And so it had things like grooming and they took out pigs and chickens from that original document, if you've ever heard that term before. So a lot of stuff in there. It took out like a release planning as an official thing of Scrum. Like not every single situation requires a release plan. And then in 2013 or 2011, I guess, to 2013, it was 17 where they didn't like the word grooming. They replaced it with refinement. It was a bit more focus on value. And then more around artifact transparency, inspection transparency, and they've made more of an emphasis on the empirical pillars of inspection or transparency, inspection, and adaptation.
Don, is that where the concept of product owner as value maximizer started to germinate, or?
I don't know, maybe. I'd have to, so one thing is these are all, there's a website out there, I forget who maintains it, that has every one of these in there. And so I don't know exactly where they started saying that, right? Because yeah, in Scrum, you're accountable for maximizing the return on investment or the value each increment. But I don't know exactly which version came in, but it's quite possibly there because value was that was the big thing back then, trying to move away from that project mindset, time, scope, budget into real value, right? And then the Scrum Values, which is different, came in as well. It's always part of a lot of the Scrum writing. A lot of the books that came out around Scrum, the Ken's books, talked about the values, but they made it part of the Scrum Guide in 2013. And then the before last version, I guess the main thing here was around there's like practices like an improvement from the retrospective had to be brought in, a lot of just sort of cleanup stuff, no more clarity. And oh yeah, the big thing was getting rid of the word software in there. So it's been changed a lot. And so in 2020, they made a few other changes. And that's what it is over here. This is a summary of all those changes. And these are the official 7 things that are written up in their release notes for it. So let's take some of these one by one. And because we're focusing on the product owner, the first few we're going to spend a bit more time on than the others. So the big change here is one team focused on one product. So here's the way it was. I've got a little image over here of the Scrum Rolls. And this is how Scrum was often depicted, right? You had the developers and you had the Scrum Master and the product owner. We often jokingly refer to this as the Mickey Mouse diagram, where you've got the development team and the Scrum Master and the product owner on the outside. And what that does is it creates sort of this idea that, you know, if a developer wants to know something about the business, what do? Well, they go talk to the product owner. And if the product owner is, you know, doesn't have an answer, they go talk to somebody else, right? If there's an issue with the organization or some impediments that are beyond their control, the developers will go to the Scrum Master, who'll go to somebody else. If some manager wants to know how the project's going, they'll go to the Scrum Master, who'll then go yell at the developers. No, hope not. Or if they have information. So it's kind of like, it creates this funnel thing, and it's sort of an us and them situation where, you know, it's the product owner is the one that does everything around. They're the only ones that talk to the customer, nobody else. So this team inside of a team is what we noticed was an issue out there. Teams that were doing Scrum properly probably didn't see an issue with this. They didn't mind development team members going and talking to customers. But there's a huge faction, we see it with our clients all the time, of this kind of us and them mindset inside of a Scrum team. So the core change here was really about getting rid of these multiple team things and bringing the product owner and the Scrum Master truly into the Scrum team. That's what this was about. That's why this change was made. There's no two teams in Scrum. There's one team, one product team focused on the product. If a developer has a question for a customer, wouldn't it be great if they had developed a relationship with some customers, and a trusting relationship that they can just go directly to them and run things by them? Wouldn't that be an awesome situation? And Scrum shouldn't stand in the way of that, right? So this is how it kind of plays out here with this. Any questions so far? Or comments? You with me? Tracking?
Yeah, I just stuck a comment in the chat. This is Diane. Yeah, we found, I've actually found in working with a variety of teams that, you know, that team personality is just such a huge factor of what works for one team doesn't work for the other team. And there was a program that I put together because we felt there was such a huge disconnect in their understanding and empathy for the customers. So we found some ways to connect them directly through some conversations and some spotlights and bringing them in on a couple of the interview calls. So even though, you know, yeah, they knew everything about the code and the product, they hadn't heard a customer say directly what they like or don't like. It always come filter through me, come filter through UX, or come filter through whoever. But the difference that it made when they got to hear it directly from the customer, not that they didn't trust my judgment, but it was just different, and it made a huge difference.
They're a human being, right? There's a human being that I get this question a lot when I do product owner training or classes. Like, what do I need to do to motivate my team? They just don't seem motivated. And my number one answer is give them the vision. It's an intrinsic motivation here. It's not a threat or promising them more money or anything like that. Have them understand that the work they do is improving somebody's life. Yes. That's a true statement. In every single thing you guys do on this call is improving somebody's life, right? Do you know who that person is? Have you met them? And so I found my job as a product owner was to just introduce them. And that's what I call the vision, right? Is whose life are we improving, and how is that, and how is it improving? Like the who and the why. And bringing them together and have them meet at least once a sprint in the sprint review, face-to-face time. Not just me, I'd go off, do it, and bring back the information. And they're just sort of like that whiny customer in the background that they never met. Right. You're absolutely right. And my first Scrum project in 2003 was for, but what we got to do is sit in the call center and listen to these operators, customer service representatives, talking to people who've just been in an accident. And go through this whole process, and then all of a sudden the system would crash, and then they'd have to ask these people who've just been in this horrible accident to start again. And the average call was 12 minutes. And I could feel the pain. The senior CSRs would just would not even use the tool, just open up Notepad and start writing stuff. And then copy and paste it into the tool because they didn't trust the tool. And we had to fix that. And I was actually a programmer back then. And I'm like, I couldn't wait to change her, the people that I got to sit with. I got to visit with a bunch of them and go show them what we did. afterwards. I couldn't wait to make that change because you could see the pain for the CSRs working with these customers.
Absolutely.
Or you can, yeah.
Yeah, we called it a ride along program where we let people sign up. Anybody in the company could sign up and go sit with the customer support reps, whether the engineering levels tier 2 or tier 1, and just sit there and listen. And they would get that empathy just like you're talking about.
Awesome. Cool. And so that was a big change, right? That was the main purpose. There's a little bit of controversy over the word developers, right? But all we knew is we couldn't stick with the word development team, right? So it couldn't be development team. So what do you call? We actually had a group of people looking at it, throwing things out, and so the only people that have an issue with the word developers are IT folk. A lot of times I hear delivery or things like that, but that means something different in like the energy company or in like supply chain management or pharmaceuticals, right? Delivery is something very different than development. Development is the actual production of something. And so it's not always a programmer outside of it. It's only IT people that see developers as programmers. So if I got a choice, if I could wave my wand, I might stick the word product in front of it, right? Product developers, just like there's a product owner and a scrum master maybe, but that's kind of what we're getting at here. This does not mean programmer. If you're QA, you're a developer. If you have anything to do with improving that person's life, you're a developer. You're building a product, right? Make sense? Any questions? We move on to the next one. So the next one was, let's give a home for the sprint goal, the definition of done, and product goal. So I don't know how much you know the different, the previous Scrum guide, but it did talk about definition of done and it talked about sprint goal. But what was it? Were those artifacts? What do we call them? They're just kind of hanging out, right? Is definition of done mandatory in Scrum? I think so, right? They were just floating out there, and then this concept of a product goal came along. And so what are these things? So down here, the term that was chosen was commitments. These are commitments, which is an interesting word to use, right? And it kind of came a little bit like by looking at these three things, you can see how they're tied to the artifacts in Scrum. So ultimately, what is a definition of done? A definition of done is a checklist. It's a checklist that defines when we have an increment. The moment a product backlog item, this is my favorite line in the Scrum Guide, the moment a product backlog item meets that definition of done, an increment is born. So it is very much tied to an increment. It defines when you have an increment. So if you can get any one of these to done, you've got an increment, and hopefully sooner in the sprint, right? So you're going through the sprint, you're getting them to done throughout the sprint. So you get an increment early, and then it builds from there. So the definition of done. So what is that? And it's the commitment, right? This is what this is the commitment that the Scrum team makes, is that we're not gonna skip this. Like, we have a certain definition of quality and what done is. And we're not going to call something done when it isn't. That is a commitment. And it is a commitment we expect to have here. And this is sometimes controversial too, because the word commitment was removed from Scrum in another place, which was how much of the product backlog do you commit to, used to be the verbiage in the Scrum Guide, that the development team at the time would commit to that. So then it became about, hey, you committed to 10 items, you only got 9 done, you failed, you broke your commitment, how dare you, right? So they changed that when they introduced the sprint goal. So the sprint goal was introduced in an earlier version of the Scrum Guide, and it gave us some wiggle room. The key thing was to meet the sprint goal, not to just get 10 things done. You can get 8 things done and be extremely successful and have delighted customers, even though you missed 2, right? Well, they turned out to be, maybe there was something that happened. It was they worked as effectively as they possibly could. So they removed the word commitment in that sense. It is still one of the Scrum values. But instead, what a lot of people would say is you would forecast how many things you can take on in the sprint backlog, borrowing a word from other empirical industries, yet commit to the sprint goal. So we will commit to the sprint goal. Like, this is the next hill we're going to take in the battle. So it made sense to use the word commitment there too. It is it is the real objective of the sprint backlog. So even though you don't get every single block done in this thing, as long as you can achieve this, we're good, right?
And I'll tell you, the thing that I like most about that is the flexibility that it gives. You know, things change, right? We started off on Monday with these 8 things. As we discovered more information, we found that, you know, we didn't need all 8. That one thing we thought we needed, we don't need. We can rearrange, you know, what we want to put in that sprint. We don't like to change once the sprint has started, but sometimes we have to. Sometimes it's like, well, we can't like not change it just because we officially have started the sprint, but we need to be thoughtful about it.
Mhm.
And as long as whatever we're changing still allows us to meet the sprint goal, I found it gave more flexibility.
Yep.
That was needed.
And what each of them do is give you the flexibility, but also the focus. That's the key
Yeah.
thing. And it's a litmus test, right? It's a bit of it's a canary in a cave, maybe. If you find that in sprint planning, it's difficult to come up with the sprint goal. If you find the team saying stuff like, well, we're going to do this, oh, but there's also this, and then this. I guess I question if we're really focused here, right? Are we trying to do too many different things, or are we just listening to the latest requests from our customers and just like saying, all right, we'll just grab all this stuff, and we've lost that direction? And so this sprint goal has helped refocus Scrum teams a lot more with it. And so it's helped me as a product owner. Is I want to know. So my question is always, hey, so how is this sprint going to get us closer to the product goal? And the answer to that should be the sprint goal. Or the other thing I like to look at is if you're walking down the hallway and you've got, let's say, a stakeholder walking by, and anybody on the team, one of the developers gets stopped by a stakeholder, say, "Hey, nice, good seeing you. Hey, I'm going to be there next week. Can't wait. But what are we going to be seeing?" At that moment, should that developer rattle off the 12 product backlog items that we're working on? No. Or do we have a cleaner way to describe this thing? Like, what is it? Or this is all about payments. Yeah, we're doing other things. We're fixing a bug over here and a report over here, but like it's about, you're going to be able to make a payment after this. We figured out all the different credit card systems, but they will be able to pay for this. Something like that is what we're looking for in the sprint goal. So it's very, very important change. But that was a change from 2017 Scrum Guide, actually 2013.
Yeah.
Back one. Cool. Any other questions out there before I move on?
I just want to throw out the idea that moving away from the term commitments to forecasts was a change in response to things in the guide. And there's other changes that do this as well. The things were getting weaponized.
Yeah.
I thought that was an interesting, when the Scrum Guide launched, there was that webinar about it. And that was one of the terms that was used is, we made changes because when we put this thing together and then it got out into the real world, people would pick and choose and weaponize stuff. Can you address that a little? I mean, I don't want to go off on a tangent.
Yeah. And this is something that initial webinar thing. One of the statements I made in it was like, if you're already doing Scrum correctly, you probably don't see much of a change here. But if you see that if you're using it incorrectly or it's being weaponized, Scrum can very easily be weaponized. Imagine this in the wrong hands. Look at Russell's background there like that. But imagine this in the wrong hands where somebody's like, what? Hang on a second. So we get them to commit to a certain amount of work. And every day I get to see where they are with this and hold their feet to the fire. This sounds great. And this is why, there is a faction out there that absolutely hates Scrum because of that. They're forced to answer these 3 questions every day in the daily Scrum. And they have to finish this. You're not going to miss your commitment, are you? So a lot of these changes, they're not for the people that have been doing Scrum and getting value from it.
Bosses like my boss at CNN back in the day glom right onto that word.
Commitment.
when there was a sprint commitment, that means he,
Yeah.
you know,
Oh
he
yeah.
had the sword of Damocles over all of our heads.
Yep. Exactly.
And, you know, yeah, you know, so, but that feeds right, you know, so it's a very dangerous word. But,
There's
you
only a
know,
few things people
yeah.
commit to in life, right? Meaning that they will do whatever it takes, you know, family, faith,
Exactly.
like whatever that is for you. Likely items in a product backlog does not fit into that category, right? Where you will go through any level. So that it's not an expectation of people to keep in any sustainable way anyways, right? Certainly there's times we have to work overtime, but the better thing to do is communicate the vision and how people's lives are affecting. Then
Yeah, that
they'll
was a
do it.
change I really liked.
Yeah.
But the problem
Well,
is not that many people got the memo or read
right.
the new version.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. They still
yeah,
today, I mean, that change was made 10 years ago. They still use the word commit.
well, they're still
groom and all
using
that.
the word grooming. Yeah, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
we can't get past that.
So a few things that's worth mentioning, because as I'm going through here, I'm gonna pause on the commitments for a second, but the third one here is even less prescriptive, and I think that fits in with some of this conversation here, because with some of the things we're trying to do is like less prescriptive. Does anyone know what the daily Scrum, what's changed in 2020? Anyone know this one?
You don't have to necessarily ask the 3 questions. You have the conversation to make sure things continue to move forward.
That's right. Now, it's not that they're bad, the 3 questions, right?
Right.
But it's one of those things that can be seen as kind of prescriptive. There's plenty of awesome teams trying different ways to plan in this 15-minute time box. It doesn't have to be the 3 questions. For those of you wondering, it used to say, what did I do yesterday? What am I doing today? And what are my blocks for the next 24 hours? And then they went from say that to then in one version of the Scrum Guide was, you could say something like this, and then finally just they're gone, right? I've seen so many different ways that teams have done this, like walk the board, or just like look at the board, say what do we need to talk about, like what's changed here.
Yeah, the worst cases of that were like really hard to watch.
Yeah.
You go to a company and basically someone's waiting for their return, and then they're back to their
It's a
online
status.
chat. It's a
Just
status update.
Yeah.
Someone's taking notes, probably the Scrum Master as a project manager, updating the, and it's turned into that in a lot of places.
Yeah. So the other thing worth noting is less prescriptive there. The other one would live down here in the retrospective. Anyone know this one?
Yeah, you're not required to take an item to improve on and put it in the sprint backlog for the next sprint.
Yeah, no longer required to put an action item in the sprint backlog. Is that wrong?
I don't know. So many people don't do that in the first place, and maybe should.
Yeah.
Actually, it's a beautiful practice. I love that practice. But if they're not doing it, is it no longer a Scrum? And not every action item sort of fits with it either. This is just another example of, and you know what? I think it might have just softened the language. It may still be in there, but
yeah, I think
so that's one
they
thing.
even choose several to work on in the next iterations.
Yeah, they may. You're right. It used to be a bit of a rule.
Because even a small thing can help. I saw that they had made that not a requirement, but then I'm like, but it's just a good practice to pick something to say, well, we can improve on that.
Yeah.
And it's almost like there should be a distinction. This is Scrum. Here's some good practices to consider. I would kind of want some things to be in like that.
Okay, well, now you're going to get me down a whole other path that I don't have time to do. But there are frameworks that have done exactly that, but are now like in 980 pages, right?
Yes, notorious ones, yes.
And so, but it's like, of course, you could list all the things you could do, but the readers are likely see that as gospel, right? And that was what was happening with the 3 questions. It was never, hey, I'm just trying this for the first time, so we better do all of it just in case, right? So the term I love using with Scrum as a framework is a minimalist framework, is it's an additive framework. You will not be successful unless you add to it and you build
Right.
upon it.
I'm so
Whereas-
tired of trying to deal with people who think a user story has to be
Right.
worded a certain way, right?
Yeah, and it's another template where you shut your brain off, just like the three
It's-
questions. As a, I want to, so that. Yet that template came out like 8 years after people started using user stories. So, some frameworks are subtractive, where you're meant not to do it all. Just take what you need, right? And both can work. But the danger with the ones that are subtractive is you just do it all just in case, and you're bogged down with process. Whereas a minimalist framework, you add as needed, but you get to use your brain a little bit more too, right? So anyways, let's move on. I'm going to do one other example of where it's less prescriptive. PBIs, it used to have a whole list of what of the types of attributes that should be on there. I think the language is softened there a little bit, where it used to say it should have an estimate and a name in it, but I think now it says something like it could have attributes, you know. So softened language around PBI. Sorry, my keyboard's in the wrong spot here. I can't type. Around PBI attributes. That makes sense. So in the Scrum Guide, it says for the each product backlog item should have a name and a description and all that stuff. Maybe, yeah, I guess a name would be probably helpful. But why would we define that, right? I've had successful teams just use whatever they work, like tax laws from the IRS coming in, they made it to PBIs. I guess technically they didn't have to do any extra work with them. We would just go look them up as we work through them. So anyways, just a few examples of where that's changed. And I just noticed my daily Scrum one's gone. Anyone know where that went? Somebody take that from me. I'll just pop it over here. So 3 questions gone. All right, so I'm kind of like biding my time a little for the product goal here. So what we talked about is one team. We talked about the home for the sprint goal definition done, and I kind of jumped over product goal. A few examples of where it's less prescriptive. There are others, but let's talk about the product goal. The product goal is now considered a commitment, just like the sprint goal and the definition of done. And so it, like the other two, are attached to an artifact. So there's still only 3 official artifacts, rather than having to say now there are 6, and each one has a commitment that's tied to it. This is the product goal. When I first heard about this, my first question was, why don't you just call it a vision? Right? I've been talking about visions for a while, and I use a vision all the time in my product. I got my own type of vision that I like to create. And the answer I got was, visions are good, but they're aspirational. Like, it's okay to have a vision that you know you'll likely never quite make, right? It's the journey towards that vision. Like Uber's vision is to make transportation as accessible as running water. You know, lofty things. We want to eradicate poverty, you know, or disease, or you know, that kind of stuff. Like, it's good to have that. This is where we want to be 5, 10, 15 years from now. It's about the future. A product goal is measurable, and a product goal has a horizon, right? You can see it. And so right when I heard that, it made sense to me. And I equated it to something I'd toyed with a little bit before, which was, I don't know if anyone's read the book 4DX, 4 Disciplines of Execution, or heard that term before. But they had a concept in there called WIG, a widely important goal. And they use a template, and this is a template that I use quite a bit. But again, like any template, it can be abused. But just as an example for it, it's change, you know, something by a certain amount by a date, right? So it would be something like, okay, I know we want to like reduce the number of, we want to get COVID down to 0. We want to eradicate COVID from the face of the earth. That's the vision. What's the product goal? Let's get 70%, let's go from right now, we're at 40% of vaccinations in the US and we want to get to 70, right? So just because we achieve the goal, does that mean we achieve the vision? Not necessarily, but it's a step closer, right? It's something that we can see in the next 6 months. That's usually my time frame as a product owner. Scrum Guide doesn't say much around that, and it shouldn't. But 6 months to a year is what your idea of the product backlog or your product goal should look at. And if you have product backlogs that have items in there that are going to take longer than a year, you've got another problem, I'd say. Like, I found it very difficult to manage product backlogs as a product owner, to manage a backlog that had things that are going to come out 5 years from now. You're talking thousands of things at that point, right? So keep it clean. I found 50 to 100 items were good for the next 6 months to a year. Not much more than that. And so the product goal helps me with that. So what do I expect to achieve in that same amount of time? As I get closer to the product goal, I have a lot of other candidate product goals in mind in my roadmap, right? So these are things that usually live in a roadmap. Here are things we want to achieve next year. We want to go to this whole other customer segment. That's all we say for now. But as we get closer, we start to build other goals that as we achieve this one or abandon it, we might take on the next product goal, which will give direction to our product backlog. And I would like to think that the vast majority, probably not every one of them, the vast majority of product backlog items are about achieving that product goal, right? So this helps a lot. It's kind of an in-between thing where from you have a short-term product backlog and then this huge vision way out there. This gives you something in between to go for. Does that make sense? I see Katrina's note. Healthy if it's less than a year. Yeah. If you think you can predict more than a year from now, right, you probably don't need to use Scrum because waterfall probably work just fine. Just plan it all and just go do that, right? So yeah. Any comments on that, on the product goal? There's got to be a question around product goal. So keeping it measurable is a good tip for your product goals.
So here's one. I'm just interested in your opinions. If other people have worked with OKRs before, found that the measures of what we were doing for, say, whether it be a sprint goal, product goal, tracking them through OKRs, I found that on the one hand, it gave some good stakeholder visibility, but very much like commitments, it also got weaponized a little bit.
Yeah.
But I'm just curious of your opinions on how it ties, how the OKRs and all that ties together. Product goal.
OKRs are great candidate product goals, I would say. So an OKR is, okay, what's your objective? And it's usually about the same timeline, right? It could be, but OKRs are so big. It could be like, as an employee, here's my objectives this year, and here's how we're going to measure it in these 5 ways, key results, right? Yeah. But I would certainly use that if that's the language in your organization and they speak it. You work for Google, then it would be cool for your products to actually have an OKR. You could have multiple, but only one is the product goal.
Right.
You know, so this is the other thing, is it's very strict about it. It says there can only be one. And then again, how everybody misinterprets things, they all go, oh, I can only have one goal to achieve ever and I can't do anything else. Well, no, we're asking you to pick one above all others. It's kind of like a vision should be for one customer. Not everybody can be important. If they are, nobody is. So pick one. You can still do things for other customers. You can still achieve other goals, but the main measure of success is done with this one. So you can have a bunch of them, but what is it? So how we write it could be through an OKR. The objective is the goal, and we measure it through several key results, right? Yeah. And I think that works quite well. The other thing I like is look at EBM if you haven't, evidence-based management on the scrum.org side. So they've got a lot of candidate things too. So they could give you some ideas of things to measure over time, right? Or that could be product goals.
Yeah, because I know that was I was just starting to look at that, because that was usually when, you know, the crickets came in the room, is when we'd figure out the, you know, what the objective was, what the goal was, at a fairly broad level, not to get it so specific that we box ourselves, into something. We had some flexibility there, and we would reset those about every quarter. But when it came to the measurements, I'd usually throw a few things on the wall, but I wanted to not be coming up with all of them. I didn't want to be the only person talking, right? Of course. And they were like, we don't know. We got it done. I'm like, no.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was just finding ways to help them think in those terms, I found really hard.
Yep. If you don't, and I say this a lot, if you don't give your stakeholders something shinier to look at, they're going to attach themselves to the wrong things like velocity or
Yes.
or time, budget, scope. That's all they have. So I found my mission as a product owner was to say, hey, but look at this. And it's very hard to change any of these metrics without releasing and getting things out into the play. Where you can't change like number of people hitting our website without a release, right? You can't change customer satisfaction without a release. You can't change revenue or costs or innovation or there's sales, recruiting, or whatever the time spent on a phone call. Whatever your objective is for your product cannot be that needle will not move unless you get something out there into so it encourages people releasing and experimenting more often. Whereas if our main objective was to get all the backlog items done, and done just meant sitting in our staging environment ready for a big release, then we haven't actually delivered any value to anyone yet. And it's all a guess. And it's a dangerous guess because we may not ever get a return on the investment of this year of development without a single release. Anyway,
yep. Good feedback. Thank you.
Yeah, no, great. And so that's the product goal thing. So very important change, probably one of the biggest change, right? Where we're making, this is now like a mandatory thing in Scrum. So that's the product goal. Self-managing over self-organizing is the next one. And this, I don't know, I go either way. Again, this is one of those, if you were working, if Scrum was working well before, probably nothing changes for you, right? But this is one where it got more controversial than I would have hoped out there. Like you see people jumping on this. Apparently there's like very strict things with it. The main change here, the main reason for this change was we're not talking about the development team anymore. So the development team was self-organizing in the previous versions of the Scrum Guide, but there is no development team anymore. There is no team within a team. And right now, actually, one thing I forgot to do is you'll even see that the term roles is gone, right? So I'm gonna cross this out here. So the term roles doesn't even exist anymore, and instead they changed it to, anyone know while I go look for my text field here?
Starts with an A.
Ends with accountabilities.
Yeah.
These are the Scrum accountabilities. These are the Scrum accountabilities. Now, I get, this is one of those where I could have gone either way. I'm not, I think it probably caused more controversy than anything. But what I like about it, because the question I get a lot from the product owner side is, what's the difference between a product owner and a product manager? Or a project manager and a Scrum master is often one. And this one is like, look, Scrum doesn't necessarily define the roles within your organization. But if you're going to do Scrum, somebody's got to take on these accountabilities. So which among you will take on the product owner accountabilities? Who among you is going to take on the Scrum Master accountabilities, and who are going to be taking on the developer accountabilities? We're not asking you to change your title or your business cards or anything like that. You can, that's fine. But we're not going to presume that in order for you to be successful, you've got to change everybody's names and titles and stuff like that. So if you're a product manager, can you take on product owner accountabilities? Think of it that way. So
Yes.
Can a product, yeah. If you're a project manager, can you take on Scrum Master accountabilities? Sure. Just because you have the word manager in your title doesn't make you like a tyrant, right? You could be a true servant leader. You could understand Scrum inside and out. and you can have any title you want, right? So Scrum doesn't define the roles and titles within an organization. You do. But these are the accountabilities that exist that you can apply to it. So that's that more controversial than I think. And then when we talk about self-organizing versus self-managing, well, if you think of, and this is the thinking behind it, and it's debatable whether it's true, but if you think of like self-managing as, well, we define who's working on it. And actually, I'm going to start with self-organizing, if you bear with me here. Who's working on it, and how are we going to work on it, right? And that made sense when it was just the developers. So a self-organizing team, you would be given direction, and then it's like, okay, this is what we need to do. So the what was get defined by somebody else, but we get to figure out who and how. Nobody's going to say you have to be on your seat for 8 hours a day and dividing out the tasks to different people. They figure that out. And whereas in the self-managing side of things, we now can add who, how, and what. And since we're talking about the Scrum team, it fits like that, right? So now it's just the Scrum team is self-managing. So that's the way to look at it. I wouldn't get too worked up over that. People compare it to nature, and self-organizing as very specific things in the world of nature and all that. But I can tell you that's not what they were thinking about when they made this change. So that's kind of the idea behind this. Yeah, complex adaptive systems is kind of where that, and then it applies to, right? And along those lines is this second to last one is 3 sprint planning topics. This is a good one. I like this one. Sprint planning. Now, the old Scrum guide used to say, well, you kind of have 2 parts to this. What are we going to work on, and then how are we going to do it? So generally, what are we going to take off the product backlog here into the sprint? That's what. We don't know how we're going to do it, but what are we going to do? Very much involves the product owner here, and then we figure out, the developers go and figure out how they're going to do it, right? And they can break it down. They can do all sorts of things here at that point. What was introduced in this last one was the word how, and many successful teams were already doing this. Or sorry, not how. That was just a trick test. Why are we doing this sprint? How about we start with that question? So why do we need another sprint? Right? What are we trying to do? Why is this needed in order to get us closer to the product backlog? Sorry, the product goal. And so it sort of insinuates an order, but there is no order applied. It doesn't say step 1, step 2, step 3. It's just, these are just the 3 parts to it. You can do them, you can revisit it, likely you have to go back to the sprint goal. So the answer to the why is your sprint goal. And then the what is what your forecast from the product backlog. And then the how is the sprint backlog, the plan on building it, breaking it down, those PBIs if you need to, whatever you have to do in order to figure out how we're going to solve the problem. It can be very technically focused, that last part, and owned by the developer. So it represents the transition from the product owner to the developers in a way, right? From why, what to how here. And then that's what they're going to work on throughout the sprint. Does that make sense? Any questions there? And then we end with this. So overall simplification of language for a wider audience. Yeah, it's down to 13 pages. And even though in an earlier version, I think it was the version before this, it says it's not just software, but if you really looked at the 2017 version of the Scrum Guide, it was kind of like they did a find and replace, or just for the word software. you still felt, and we more and more, our top clients right now at Improving that are doing agile transformations are not software or IT, and that's a growing market. We literally have teams on offshore drilling platforms using Scrum, like geologists and drilling engineers and geophysicists on a Scrum team. So, and when they read the Scrum Guide, we've heard it just feels, and when they do the assessments for the certifications, they feel like it doesn't seem like it's for me. Because even though it doesn't say the word software, you used to see the word system or requirement, testing, and you could draw correlations with something they kind of do, but the overall sense is that it was still software related. It was still IT focused.
I ran into that a lot. I ran into that a lot at Northrop Grumman, where they were trying to do it as much with mechanical and electrical and engineers as software. And the complaint was, this is a software process, you're misapplying it. And it was that same sort of reaction, right?
Yep.
And it read like that. And all the literature reads like that. And so, I wrote an article once that I said, the people that wrote the manifesto were thinking about software and soon discovered that this could be applied to many other domains, because it's really about teams getting together, getting stuff done.
Yep.
It's really team science.
I was at the Agile 2011 conference. It was in Salt Lake City. So it was a 10-year anniversary of the Agile Manifesto. So they had Snowbird, if you know, Agile Manifesto, that's where they signed the Agile Manifesto. And they give these like tours up to it, and they had people like touring this crappy little conference room, and this people working there. It was like a pilgrimage to Snowbird to see where the Agile Manifesto is written. Well, they had 16 of the 17 Agile Manifesto signers at it, and they had a park bench conversation. I think there was like 1,600 people at the conference or something like that, and they had all 16 of them up on stage and like some hokey trees and fake grass underneath them. It's like park on this long park bench, and so we got to ask them questions. And one of the questions they got was, 10 years later, what would you change? And the only thing that they all sort of agreed to was that it was about software. It's called the Agile Manifesto for Software Development. And it was about working software over comprehensive documentation. And they all said, we didn't realize at the time, but this has been applied much further than that over the years. And we see it in the work that we do. And it was never like we went out looking for it. I remember the first time I did it is after working with a company's IT department. Their bottleneck was no longer inside of IT. It was in their marketing department. And they said, hey, do you think, you could teach them to do what we're doing? And I'm like, maybe. I don't know anything about marketing. And like, I'm willing to try, but and then I said to them right off the bat, I was like, look, I can explain to you how we do things in software. And if you guys can sort of apply that to your world, I'll have at it. But I just don't know much about marketing, if this will even work. And we did it, and it worked awesome. And then that happened a few more times with an HR department and another group. And now I've gotten that confidence. It's like, this totally works. We've got the history and we've seen it. And I've worked with like CIOs and organizations, and we're working. There's like, I need this to make sense to people who are on like Wi-Fi routers up in the Rocky Mountains. Like
it's really
not
fun to apply
software.
it to the leadership teams.
Yeah.
So you got they're not writing code. They're talking about, they're responsible for stuff getting done, but you create a collective responsibility.
Yeah.
Right. And that's a lot of fun. So, when I do it, engage with an Agile, if I can, I'll get the leadership team doing their own Scrum. And, it's pretty cool when you watch it take off.
Yeah. So read the 2020 guide. If most of you guys are software or IT, read the Scrum Guide with a different hat on now. Like, read it as if you are in a marketing group or a sports team, or see if that applies. And that's the way I've read it that way, and it makes more sense. I read it with my client in mind now, who aren't doing this. I'm working with a team that's trying to save their pharmaceutical plant from being shut down by the FDA, right? That kind of thing, and they're going through a bunch of deliverables. It applies to them too. So that's the key there. That's why it was simplified a little bit. It's hard if you're going to get into a bunch of more practices to make it apply and as wide for as wide of an audience here. So yeah, not software. My favorite one is the CIO that changed it from software to solutions within his organization, working solutions over comprehensive documentation. Our primary measure of progress is working solutions, not software. It doesn't mean that they're good solutions, right? We create a safe environment to test out a solution from anybody, but a safe environment to test it and learn from it and then try a different solution, right? Anyways, so those are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 major changes to it. So hopefully that makes sense, and that we've kind of covered what you hope for here. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that sticks out, but I think I'll just leave the floor open to questions, or if anyone else can think of one that I forgot about, which may very well be the case. Any comments or questions from any of you? Or Russell and Glenn, is there anything else I may have missed here?
It's
I think
pretty
that goal,
comprehensive.
I think that goal trips up a lot of people, Don. Let me be more specific. Many people still don't quite grasp the goal. And so tripping it up would suggest that they understand and have a hard time doing it. But I find a lot of people still not being clear on what is the goal. And so thank you for saying something about it. But even for those of us who are very close to this, I think there's a lot of explaining we still have to do, and probably a lot of explaining that Jeff and Ken still have to do about the product goal.
Yeah. Yeah,
Or
Jeff
maybe
and Ken
just, or maybe just you explaining for them.
Jeff and Ken are the ones that just get to say, hey, yeah, you go do this product goal thing, and the rest of us have to figure it out and do it for real, right? And apply it to actual work. They don't do that anymore. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, thanks, Russell. Any others? Glenn, you were saying?
No, it's good.
Cool. All right. Well, hey, I'm happy to continue the conversation for anyone. We're pretty much at time here, but I stick around for any questions. I know we have a drawing for a book. And
yeah, we'd like to. I'm going to jump in and make a quick plug, Don, for your book. You know, I read a lot of books, and Don, I admire Don, but despite there's other people I admire that don't write a good book. I'm just telling you. But it's worth your time if you buy, beg, borrow, or steal Don and Ralph's book. It's worth your energy you would expend
Cool.
to do that.
Cool.
Thanks, Russell. We also do classes as well. I think Glenn, do you have like a thing on that? And
I
so
do.
I'll hand it back over. So thank you all very much, and add me on LinkedIn if you want to continue the conversation. But I'll hand it back to you, Glenn.
Cool. Thanks, Don.